Joining me today is a biologist, a former professor at Evergreen State, who is now a professor in exile. Bret Weinstein, welcome back to the Rubin Report.
Thanks for having me back on.
Professor in exile, my friend, that's what it says on your Twitter bio, which means it's your most defining characteristic right now.
That has become the tenor of my life for the moment.
All right, so I went into the Rubin Report archives. They're very much like the Jedi archives. I went into the Rubin Report archives this morning. You were on this show originally on May 30th, 2017, so that's about a year and a half ago. It was just as the Evergreen brouhaha was beginning. You still were employed at the time, which probably seems like a lifetime ago. So I think first, maybe we should just play a little catch-up from then. Now, just to be clear, you have been on the show once since then. You were on with your brother Eric, and we did a little bit about Evergreen in your life, but I thought first let's just do catch-up on what happened, where you're at, where you're going, and then we're going to do sort of new territory, and we're going to cover a lot of biology and all that.
Great. So May 30th of 2017 would be exactly 1 week into the riots. The protest at my classroom that became relatively famous happened on May 23rd. So 1 week in, I was sitting in this chair.
And that feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? I mean, it feels like it for me, and I think less has happened to me, although it's been a pretty busy year and a half.
The transformation of my life and Heather's life in that period has been so dramatic that it's hard to even relate. You know, I've never had so much happen in a year.
Yeah. So, okay, so for people that don't know anything about the story, and I suspect there's very few watching this at the moment, can you give me like the 90-second recap of what happened?
Sort of.
Can that be done in 90 seconds? Let's see.
It can be done with carnage. I must say I fear this question more than any other because there's so much detail in the story, it can't be covered properly.
All right, give a Cliff Notes version that basically is an explainer.
Equity and inclusion movement got started on my campus, as it is on virtually every campus, and the new president of Evergreen threw fuel on the fire. He used the division over that issue to accomplish things he could not have accomplished otherwise. I tried to block his moves to dismantle the excellent part of Evergreen's teaching model, which Heather and I were using to full effect, and I became effectively enemy number one of this equity and inclusion movement. They arranged a protest at my classroom, very dramatic. 50 students showed up demanding my resignation. Not a single one of them was a student I had ever encountered. But in any case, they made a terrible error. They filmed their confrontation with me. They uploaded it, I now know, to Facebook. Somebody else in the public picked those videos up and broadcast them, and the world watched me try to reason with them, and that set things in motion where Evergreen started using me as an excuse for its problems. It blamed me for what happened there, for the drop-off in enrollment, for all sorts of things. And I started engaging with the public about what was taking place at Evergreen, about issues of freedom of expression, free inquiry on college campuses, and increasingly evolutionary biology, which, you know, people did not initially really understand that was the focus that I had, not freedom of speech issues.
Yeah.
But now increasingly that's what people want to talk to me about.
Right, although we're going to get to plenty of that because I know that's what your real focus and passion is, and it's sort of funny that now you've been thrust into this. But in effect, you were protesting putting racist policies on campus. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and this is one of the, I think, hardest lessons for people to learn. People, good people, get the idea that you can spot the right side by certain heuristics. And, you know, there's been a historical fact of oppressed people tending to be people of color, etc. And so people have gotten lazy about recognizing who's in the right. If you follow a principle to its logical conclusions, in other words, if you're against segregation, for example, as I am, then when the segregationists are telling white people to leave campus or asking them to leave campus, then you are committed to standing against segregation. And when you do stand against segregation, the world goes crazy, because people who are being lazy about recognizing which side is defending the principle that they subscribe to, they fall out in the wrong place. And so anyway, yes, it is your principles and adherence to them that gets you in trouble.
Yeah, okay, so you then show up in this studio a week after this whole thing goes down. It was your first public interview about any of this. What did you think at the time was going to happen by talking about this publicly? Or what was your hope, at least, by talking about this publicly?
Well, you know, initially, my hope was to expose the foolishness at Evergreen and save the college from its own worst instincts, because your audience may not care terribly deeply about this, but for a small number of people, for 4,000 students at a time, Evergreen was actually a wonderful experiment in which it was possible for people who hadn't had tremendous educational advantages before they got to college to have an experience that couldn't be reproduced anywhere else. Evergreen's model was so unique that if you ended up in the right classrooms with professors who really cared, it was like no other place.
Yeah. And you were given incredible freedom as a professor to do what you wanted with these kids, right?
I believe that the position that Heather and I had was the freest academic position in the country and maybe on earth.
Wow.
I mean, really more freedom than a tenured professor at Harvard has. And that was, let's be honest, it was both a blessing and a curse. If you decided to use that freedom for good, if you decided to figure out how to innovate structures that didn't exist anywhere else, you could do it and nobody could tell you not to. On the other hand, if you decided to take the rest of your career off and teach with one hand while you dealt with your hobbies, you could also get away with murder. And so that happened as well. And there was a tension. Every good professor at Evergreen grumbles about the fact that there are a large number of people who are holding positions there that they don't really value. And the phrase that we typically used in private on the faculty was that Evergreen paid in freedom, which meant that it didn't pay well, it wasn't a good paying job, but the ability to have a blank canvas and decide how you were, what you wanted to teach and in what way, and to innovate new mechanisms and take students off campus for a week or 2 or 10, that freedom was a very valuable commodity that Evergreen undervalued the whole time. It should have leveled with people that it was hiring, and it should have said, look, this job is not going to make you wealthy, but it can make you very happy if you have the temperament that really wants to figure out what's possible.
So as this was unfolding, and now you went public, and you also did Rogan, and you were on Tucker Carlson, where you said, I'm deeply progressive, because suddenly you were sort of getting crap from your side, so to speak, and you were getting embraced by perhaps a different side. And I do want to get a little more into that now, because it shows what a sort of crazy realignment politically we've had these days. Were you shocked how deep it went? So you went public, you were giving the facts, you were exposing sort of the corruption and how it went all the way up to the administration and all that. I think from that first interview we did, I think you thought that there would be a course correction in here, or at least there was a chance for a course correction. And at least the way I read the last year, at no point was there even a slowdown or any reflection from the administration and the rest of it. They just went in on this.
I am completely shocked by the fact that the world's recognition of just how off things were at Evergreen did not force an acknowledgement that something was wrong. So I would not have been surprised if Evergreen had backed off cynically, if they had privately said, actually, we were on the right track, we were misportrayed, but we nonetheless have to acknowledge what the world is saying to us. The fact that that did not happen at all still shocks me, and I can't explain it, because you have a president who is widely understood to be, is there a polite word for bonkers?
He's bonkers is good. It is one of my favorite words, yeah.
We could say
I like
worse.
Bananas too, but bonkers, yeah.
Wackadoodle, something.
Yeah.
But in any case, we have a president who was, look, he's the Mad King. right? He's the Mad King, and you've got a whole bunch of people standing around accepting his authority when, in fact, he's an outsider. His understanding of the college or his plans for the college are completely inconsistent with the values that the college was founded on.
Yeah, and were they really accepting his authority, actually? Because there are moments in the chaos of this that these videos are posted where he can't even leave to go to the bathroom, and it's like he was also a hostage in this, in his own, maybe his own, like, perverted dream or something, you know what I mean?
He was both puppet and puppeteer.
Yeah, okay.
And so the thing is, yes, he is held hostage in those things, but I believe he's a willing hostage in the sense that he's trying to accomplish something. And, you know, look, it tells the whole tale. Once you say what we are doing is about equity, there is a whole swath of people that cannot figure out how they would object, no matter what it is that you say next, no matter what your plan is. If you've said that it is for the purpose of racial equity, then a whole section of the population will just fall in lockstep.
What is that? What is that psychologically, do you think?
Oh, I know.
Because I think we're seeing this everywhere now. This is not just something that's happening at universities anymore. This is happening all over society.
I wish I could say that it is an error in cognition, that people are seeing it incorrectly. What I know for sure now, as well as anybody on earth, is that the part of people's minds that drives them in the direction of silence, of self-editing, of all of these things, is actually accurately perceiving a threat that it cannot manage. Now, I'm not looking for sympathy. I do not have my job anymore, and I miss it. It was a great job. However, I've landed on my feet. I wouldn't trade my position for any other. I like where I am. However, first of all, there's not an infinite number of those positions in the world. So most people who are looking at some sort of an equity and inclusion juggernaut, who are thinking, should I stand up, actually have to ask themselves, what happens if I do? Do I have an economic plan B for my family, right? Anybody who doesn't have an economic plan B for their family, and I have to say, as much as I would like Evergreen to be a place in which all the faculty had enough skills that they could go do something else if they have to, they don't, right? They can't easily move to another college because the way they teach at Evergreen doesn't create a CV that will get you hired elsewhere easily. And so I think lots of people are looking ahead and saying, if I stand up and I say the right thing now, what will become of me? And the problem, the place where I have sympathy for anybody who sees that and says, look, I don't have a plan B, I don't know what to do. Where I lose sympathy with them is when they then, having made that calculation, rationalize what they are saying. And they join, not reluctantly, but they become enthusiastic allies of this movement in order to, basically, they sell the rest of us out.
Right, and in a weird way, they almost have to do that psychologically to live with themselves, right? I mean, otherwise you realize that, I mean, then you are a sellout. It's harsh, but it's true. But what the reason I'm so fascinated with this is because, as you know, I've been on tour with Peterson for the last couple months, and I think this is the number one question that we get asked. People want to speak up, and they are afraid of losing their jobs. And I think that's why your story resonated with so many people, because people were looking at you and going, well, it's pretty freaking obvious. This guy's not a racist. He's not a hater. He's a self-identified lefty and a progressive and all of these things. And somehow he stood up to the monster. And I think the fact that you're still here and you're not employed at the moment, and I do want to discuss that a little bit too, but the fact that you're still here, you're alive, you're still willing to talk about these things, I think that's the type of courage that people are looking for at the moment.
Well, I do. So I have to say, for, I don't know, a year now, I have had these interactions, a couple times a day. Somebody will come up to me on the street, and unless I'm in Olympia, it's always nice.
Right.
People say that.
Even sans beard, they're still coming up to you?
Actually, that has reduced it. I think they're not quite sure either. Is that who I think it is, or is that Eric, or is it Bret? I don't know. But
you go buzz cut, and then you're scot-free, man.
Oh man, I could go on the lam, they'd never find me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it raises questions. The stuff that people say to me about what they see on the outside, I get to compare that to what the experience was on the inside. And so I've done a lot of thinking about what it is. Is there some reason that I stood up when others didn't? And I think, it comes down to something simple, which, I'll just put it out there. I think people are rationalizing their acceptance of this nonsense movement in order to sleep. And for some reason, that particular switch works the opposite way for me. If I heard myself rationalizing that, I would not be able to sleep. So in order to sleep, I had to stand up. And, I'm lucky. I have really good friends. I have a wonderful brother who was, friends with you, and that put us in contact. And I have something else to talk about. Evolutionary biology is fascinating to people. They don't know how to think about it, and they're, just as my students were, they're very interested to hear what I have to say on the subject. So that means somehow, even though I couldn't see it exactly on May 23rd of 2017, there was a path forward for me, which, it could come crashing down tomorrow. But so far, it looks good, and I regret nothing.
Is there an evolutionary explanation to that type of person that either can sleep or cannot sleep? Because, people come up to all of us all the time now and they say, I wish I could speak up. I don't want to lose my job. My wife's pissed at me. I mean, all of these things. And they're literally, sometimes I'm talking to people one-on-one and they're whispering. I mean, this layer of fear is seriously real, and it is sitting on top of people. So is there an evolutionary explanation why at the moment it seems that a very small amount of people are doing it?
Absolutely.
And for me, just quickly, I would just say for me, it's like, I don't know if it's about sleeping. I just feel like I'm doing what's right. That's it. It's actually not more, it's not more confusing or needs more of an explanation than that. That's just what I'm doing.
Yeah, there are two things to say on this front. One, so I know we're going to talk more about evolutionary theory later on, but
yeah.
There is a way in which evolutionary theory stalled 30 years ago. And I don't believe that the explanation that you're looking for is on the table in the way that any evolutionist that you ask would say, oh yeah, the explanation is over here. But I do believe we can see what it is. There are a lot of adaptations that do not map well onto the individual. If you look at the individual and you say, well, why would the person behave this way? It seems paradoxical. Sometimes if you look at something larger than the individual, and it's not the group, this is the thing, we've been caught in this argument about group selection since the 60s, or actually even earlier, but that's where it began to come to a head. If you look at the lineage, that is to say, a population of people who are related, now talking about ancestral populations, there are many characteristics that have value for the lineage moving forward that are hard to understand from the point of view of the individual. And many of the things that we have a really hard time explaining, including things like homosexuality and religion, many of these things are adaptations that exist at that slightly higher level. And so what I would say is an individual who can't sleep if they're not doing the right thing or if they hear themselves rationalizing, that individual is not well suited to certain jobs, but they're very well suited to other jobs. And the idea that a population has an emergent nature and that, a division of labor between, I'm not telling you that not rationalizing is the way we should all be. It may well be that we need certain people who are very good at carefully rationalizing certain things in order to get jobs done. I mean, I would imagine if you are in the military, if you are in a position of command in the military, that there are certain things that you have to rationalize in order to win the war. Now, I'm not saying I don't like war. I'm not saying that, every war should be won, you shouldn't enter into a war that isn't justified. But once you've entered into it, the goal is justified. Maybe you have to rationalize certain things. You know, you move troops over here in order to protect something over there. Well, what are you doing to these people? You may be sending them to their deaths. So, you know, even talking about it makes me uncomfortable because it's not something I would be good at. But the point is, when you look at the population, and the fact is the populations that we have alive on Earth today are all winners, right? These are the winners, irrespective of how you got here, irrespective of how oppressed your population looks in relation to others. Somehow you made it to the present. You're a winner. Those winning populations had many characteristics within them, and they knew how to call upon these people and, you know, sideline those people and then switch it up at the point you arrive somewhere else where different skills are necessary. So in essence, yeah, I think there's a very simple evolutionary explanation, and some of us have certain skills, other people have other skills, and the real trick is, can you figure out the switching mechanism that decides what to call on at what moment?
That seems to be the key part of this, right? I mean, that's it. It's like some people are going to do it. Some people know they should do it and won't do it. Some people probably shouldn't do it and do it, and everything in between.
Well, you know, you probably have this experience too. But when people come up to me and they talk to me, there's a couple different styles of conversation that unfold. You know, there's lots of people who want to, you know, apologize for what happened to me, which I always find odd, you know.
Unless they were there in the room.
Right, unless it was them. It's never those
But I'm guessing those people have not apologized.
They never contact me. But, you know, some people want to apologize. Some people, you know, want to thank me. And some people, there's this one thread, which is, I'm facing something like this too.
Yeah.
Can you give me some advice? And, you know, I always say the same sort of thing to them, and it throws them. You know, I always say, look, it's not safe. You have to think very carefully about what you're doing, and don't kid yourself about what you're signing up for. And, you know, you just watch in their eyes as they grapple with the fact that they didn't get what they wanted from you, what they wanted to be told. They wanted somebody to egg them on and say, do it, it's the right thing, it'll work out. And you tell them, oh, it may not work out. And, you know, there's a moment of heartbreak. But my hope is that the people who should do it have to go through that little heartbreak in order to get to the other side. And so among my various jobs at the moment is to show people the abyss.
Yeah.
And just say, look, is this the abyss you want to jump? If it is, nobody can tell you that but you. I certainly can't.
Yeah.
It would be irresponsible of me to tell people to do something like what I did, because you could get maimed.
Yeah, and in a way, it's sort of the shows that I'm most proud of here are the ones where I was able to facilitate a little bit of that. So it's sitting down with you, it's sitting down with Lindsay Shepard, who went through something very similar. It's sitting down with James Damore, these people who did not ask to be heroes, who, even if I say the word hero, I can see you're uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like the people that didn't want this, but somehow it got thrust upon them, and then they got there, and then hopefully I was able to amplify that a little bit, which then spreads that out to all sorts of other people, which is pretty cool. So let's I know I don't want to do this for obviously the entire interview, so let's just catch up on a couple things.
One other thing.
Yeah, well, we'll do a bit more. So
there's one thing that is, and I believe there's a little caveat to it. If you do it, and you do it for the right reasons, in other words, you could do it cynically. You could stand up against one of these things in order to see if you couldn't get famous or something. People will see through that, right? Especially the people who've gone ahead down this road, because they know something about it. But if you do it for the right reasons, if you're really trying to advance the ball, to challenge a bad narrative, the people who have gone through this recognize it. And, you know, it won't feed you, but it is very reassuring to discover other people who see the corrupt narrative, who understand what happens when you challenge it. So anyway, if you're hungry to meet other people like that, standing up, you know, you got to figure out what you're going to do to feed yourself, but it does put you in contact with lots of people who are very worthwhile. Yeah,
it's so interesting because, again, after being with Peterson, it's like people say to him, you know, I want to get a new job. Should I just quit my job tomorrow? And it's like, you have to seriously think about what your options are. You may hate your job, but it doesn't mean you can leave tomorrow.
Right.
You got to think about all of this seriously, and I think that is the key here. So I'm curious, how much of this has shifted what you think politically? Because you do talk about politics now, and I know when I had you in there for the first time, I think I said to you, we'll revisit this question, because I thought, here's a guy that I come from a very similar political place as him, as a progressive and all of these things, and now I see, as you know, I consider myself a classical liberal, and I love libertarian ideas, obviously. We just did stand-up together last night in Brea, California. You and your brother joined me on stage for the second half, and it was mostly a conservative crowd. There were some Trump people, there were some lefties and some liberals, but mostly conservatives, and they love you guys, and yet you both still identify as lefties, and the whole thing. And I wonder now, a year and a half later, are you shocked at that you are now really liked by people that perhaps you thought were your ideological opponents, and now you're sort of on the outs with the people that you used to be allies with?
Okay, that's a good question.
I get one every episode.
I am heartened and flabbergasted by what I encounter on the center right. This is not the Republican Party that I remember from my youth. This is a very different entity, and I think it has a lot of refugees who've been driven out of other places, and they've grouped there because, I don't know, because something over there is making sense to them.
Well, as you said to me the first time we met, Dave, you have PTSD from the progressives. Yeah.
And I must say, we should return to this, but I was very heartened to hear you bring that up during your episode with Ben Shapiro and Eric and Jordan. You went through a cool exercise, which I think deserves a place with Steel Manning. And your exercise, I think, was something like, where is some place that you suspect your own thinking might be incorrect? And you brought up political PTSD as a place to pay attention to. But let's just say I am shocked that the center-right seems to be, it has protective custody of liberty and free speech and science of all things. I mean, how the heck did the center-right end up having custody of these things, which are traditionally things that the right is uneasy about and the left has defended? But nonetheless, the people who value them are where they are. I think they do have something wrong. Your initial question was, has this changed my political view? And I think everybody said it would. And I believe I am being honest with myself when I say, really hasn't changed my view of what is true politically much, if at all. I think because what I believe is true isn't predicated on anything social, right? In other words, these are conclusions that I reached through game theory and evolutionary thinking and observation of the political landscape. They're not things, it wasn't that I went to a dinner party and had a good time and fell in with their political ideology.
Right.
So it's not, the fact that I am not welcomed in certain quadrants of the left doesn't change anything about what's true at all.
Right.
It can't.
So I understand that, but at the same time, I mean, you can go to, I've done public events with you that we're usually invited by libertarian organizations. We've done some Ayn Rand things together and a couple other things. And I think everything that we've done publicly, and when you've joined me for stand-up, the crowds all basically seem to be on the right. As you're saying, this new center-right that maybe needs a better phrase than that, because center-right it needs something sexier than that per se. But I mean, have you been invited anywhere by progressives to tell your story, or to get some camaraderie or empathy or sympathy or kudos or anything other than guff?
Very occasionally and only slightly. I mean, the asymmetry is amazing. And I must say, one of the most interesting things to me about the early phase of this public part of my life is that initially there was just this overwhelming message that came back at me. You are a conservative, or welcome to conservatism, or something like that. And
welcome to the dark side, I think, is what they usually say.
They do say that.
Yeah.
And then at the point that the phrase IDW showed up on the landscape, then there was this point about, oh, the IDW is a right-wing movement or something like that. And so there's a trajectory. There's something, we track immediate effects pretty well as people. We can observe them and detect them. There's often a slower pattern that is harder for us to see. And so just by analogy, I find this is true with healing, just physical healing. If you do damage to your knee, for example, there's a 1-month healing trajectory, but there's also a 1-year and a 5-year trajectory, and they're much harder to spot. So anyway, the interesting thing is the challenge of you're on the right, or now surely you will be moving to the right. That was just an overwhelming message that came back. But the ability to talk back to that message and say, actually, no, still on the left, actually part of a left you don't even remember exists. And one of my fears is that all of the stuff that the left was correct about is not getting properly credited now. So to the extent, I don't know if people have seen this Hidden Tribes report that came out maybe a month ago now, that says that there's this vast, exhaustive 80% in the middle who do agree on, the desirability of a fair society that doesn't burden one population in order to enrich another, and that we basically share.
That basically it's only 8% actually that buy into this hyper-political correctness and the rest of it.
Right, it's a tiny fringe on the authoritarian left, and it's a tiny fringe on the, the white nationalist right, and the rest of us in the middle, we're not in perfect agreement. We don't agree on the order of the priorities, but we do agree basically on what a good society would function like, and that a lot of the gains, the ability to be gay and out and function in society without that being a tremendous obstacle, that's something that the left deserves credit for. Racial equality, equity is a different beast by virtue of the new, I hesitate to even call it a definition because it's not a definition in the standard sense, but equality, these are traditional left values, and we were right about them. And so the fact that these things are now no longer controversial, that belongs in the discussion too. The left has been right about some stuff. It's also been wrong about some stuff. And the right has been right about some stuff, and it's been wrong about some stuff. And it is time for that conversation.
Absolutely, and that's why I don't denigrate what it was. I am upset with what it is. And perhaps guys like you and your brother and Sam, some people that still identify as lefties, will be able to do a reclamation project that I just don't see anymore. I see sort of more that this thing needs to burn so out of the ashes a phoenix can rise. That's just maybe a little bit of a tactical thing, but let's just jump back to an evolutionary explanation for some of this. So I asked you about why some people can do this from an evolutionary perspective, why some people are able to step up and some people aren't. What's the evolutionary explanation for why this, let's say, 8% very loud but small group of people feel the need to purge everyone? Is there an evolutionary, because that seems it would be almost counter to evolution. You'd want to have more commonalities with people and bring in a big tent, but what I see them consistently doing is just getting rid of everybody who dare, talk back to the god.
Well, I wish I had known this was going to come up because I would have looked it up. But there was a
putting you on the spot.
There was a report that emerged, maybe it was 6 or 8 months ago, that I haven't looked into it, and it's not my area of specialty, but it sounded right to me. And what it said was that there is a particular personality trait, authoritarianism, that isn't ideological. It doesn't really care whether it's, defending fascism or communism. What it wants to do is boss people around. And that essentially what's confusing to people is that at the moment, these dyed-in-the-wool authoritarians are concentrated over on the left, and they're saying stuff that sounds nominally like leftist stuff, but that, were the winds to shift and the authoritarians of the moment to be over on the right, they'd be there. And so That makes sense to me. And what I would like people, yourself included, to consider is that there is almost no point in engaging those people, right? This question of the importance of liberty is settled, right? The 80% of us in the middle all get it. The fringe on the far left and the far right are, I don't want to say safe to ignore, because they can always rise up and become important, as the one on the left is doing. However, that's not where the game is. The game is all of the people who can't figure out how to escape from the stigma and all that is driving civilization. So all of the people who are falling in line with what's going on the authoritarian left, those are the people to reach. And what you raise about, let's say the audience last night at the comedy club, and this is reliable, this was the second one I did with you, it was exactly the same the first time. The thing that is so heartening is, I can come into a room, and you're right, that room last night must have been 95% right of center.
Yeah.
And first thing you tell them is, here's a progressive. I tell them I'm a radical, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't dampen their enthusiasm one bit. In fact,
It
they're thrilled to discover that things are not so bleak, and that there is somebody on the other side of this thing who's still talking reasonably and can hear them and can see them and doesn't think that they're racist and out of control. And so anyway, I know I take a lot of flack for, interacting with the right, and I'm not listening to that flack.
Yeah,
because
good.
it is the best thing we can do is to engage, and when you spot the humanity of the people on the other side, then to the extent that we differ over something, we can talk about it.
All right, well, we could keep going down this Pandora's box of lunacy related to everything that you've been through, but let's just catch it up to where we are now, and we can start looking at the future a little bit. So you and your wife, Heather, who you referenced, Heather Heying, who's been on the show, who's a brilliant professor as well, and has that brave evolutionary tick that you have too. How'd you end up marrying a woman that was going to have the same evolutionary tick as you? That's pretty good.
You really want to know the answer?
Yeah.
Heather and I, we were not going out, but we were friends in high school. And, I don't know that others will understand the phrase, but the one that runs in my head is, somebody goes to high school with the girl you should marry, and it might be you, right? So anyway, in my case, I don't know how, because, I was a confused kid like every other kid that age. There was something about her that seemed so very right, and I have to say, I was right about that. Best decision I ever made.
Was she ever pissed at you during this because you sort of thrust her in the spotlight too? And the fact is, both of you left your jobs. You got a $500,000 settlement for 2 tenured positions, which to some people that $500,000
sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot of money, but this is your life's work. You and your wife. You've since relocated your family and your 2 kids. So this is massive. $500,000 in the scheme of that is not a lot. But was she ever bothered or hesitant by what you were doing? Because she didn't go public about this until a bit after.
She was never pissed, not for a minute. She and I were in complete agreement. We saw the same thing unfold at Evergreen. The nature of our teaching at Evergreen was kind of interesting in the sense that we had like a little undeclared graduate program in evolutionary biology where we couldn't award you a master's degree, but if you were interested in evolutionary biology, and many people didn't know they were, but they would take my program, and then I would sort of nudge them over towards Heather's program. So we had students bouncing back and forth, and we had a community of people that were in our circle. So the basic point is that creates an opportunity for every night at dinner. Heather and I would compare notes, what we were seeing at the college and all of these things, talk about, students, what the student's blind spot is, what they do particularly well. And as this unfolded, Heather and I saw the identical picture, or maybe the way to say it is the picture of what was happening emerged between us as we discussed it. And she was, let's put it this way, what put me in the bullseye was the emails that I wrote and the things I said in faculty meetings. I never wrote an email that Heather didn't look at first and tell me it's ready. And frankly, there were a lot of emails that I didn't send, and if I made one error, I believe I should have sent every one of them, right? Because what they do is they leave a historical record of what is taking place. So the dissent was, in retrospect, very clear as you went back through the emails. But anyway, yeah, Heather was in complete agreement the whole time, and I think the confrontation was less in keeping with her personality traits than mine, but in terms of her commitment and her belief in what we were doing, it was a team effort.
There's a lesson in marriage right there. There's probably many lessons in marriage
So
right
many.
there. Yeah. All right. So let's just get to where you are now. You guys have left Washington. Neither one of you are teaching at the moment. You're trying to figure out what your future is. I assume the same with Heather. What is that like, number one? And number two, I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that schools have not thrown offers at you. I mean, you have a seriously great public profile now. You are respected by so many people. You have fans, not just students now. You have former students, but you have fans that would love to sign up for courses that you would be teaching and all sorts of things, where I think most people would look at this on their face and think, wow, what an asset this guy would be, not only intellectually, but PR-wise and all that. That's not where we're at.
It's absolutely not, and it does say something. And I'm an outsider to whatever discussions it is that result in nothing of that sort coming our way, but it is conspicuous. So you asked what it's like. I'm having a very unusual experience in life, and my life was great before any of this happened. It's great now. The lack of security is frightening when I stare at it. Heather and I have 2 kids, and if we didn't, we would be in a different position. We could take risks, and we could afford to go through, years of austerity. But as it is, we have responsibilities, and our kids didn't sign up for this. So, I mean, they would have. But
are you saying they didn't get that gene? What are you telling me?
oh no, they're on board, but they're kids.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to protect them, and so the whole thing has been frightening from the point of view of what it means for the future, because literally, I don't know. It seems like things are headed along a path in which, the settlement that you mentioned is a tiny fraction of what we would have earned over the rest of our careers at Evergreen. A huge amount of it was burned up paying lawyers and taxes. You get all that money in one chunk. So we got about 2 years of buffer money from that, but it wasn't like we got bought out. We could have, in a state that had punitive damages, we likely could have won something much more like $4 million for the amount of income that we would have earned over the rest of our careers.
And why did you guys not go that route? Because I think a lot of people, when they saw the number, I remember when I saw the number, I think I just saw an article or something, and I was like, whoa, why so low?
Because Washington is one of 11 states without punitive damages. It's that simple.
Oh, I thought you said that Washington did have punitive damages. Nope. I just misheard you. Okay.
So that caused us to effectively cut our losses and decide that there was nothing to be done. We did the best we could with Evergreen and cutting our ties with them at the point that they made it clear. I mean, they behaved atrociously in negotiations. For one thing, they dragged their heels. They wouldn't sit down with us until we were already back on contract for the next year, fully assuming that we would be going back into a classroom. But what would it be like to walk onto a campus that is, paying a PR firm to demonize you, right? What would that be like? And we would have done it, but they insulted us in negotiations. They offered us panic buttons, right? As if us
panic buttons in the room, literally?
Yeah, like as if the problem was that we were panicked
Yeah.
people, right? Rather than that they had,
They could have at least offered you a counter baseball bat, right? Wouldn't that have been nice?
Right, something. But they didn't. And, hobbling the police. The whole thing was a fiasco. So we cut our losses. We moved to Portland, which is wonderful. I know that's in some ways not its reputation, but it is a marvelous place.
You went to the only more progressive place.
It does seem that we have.
Boy, you're a glutton for
we've
punishment.
Gone to the belly of the beast. But the beauty of Portland, there's a beauty and there's a tragedy. There is this equity and inclusion thing, and it seems to go up to the mayor's office, who happens to also, frighteningly, in a parallel to Evergreen, be the police commissioner, so he can stand down the police and has done so in some circumstances.
Well, that video from a couple of weeks ago with Antifa, basically running traffic in the middle of Portland. I mean, it's unfathomable that that's happening in the streets of a United States city.
Right. Right. It is. They are flirting with the same. I mean, it is the same story as Evergreen, except this is a major American city. To have a college play games with literal anarchy is dangerous enough. To have a city doing it, I shudder to think.
You didn't want to think about Texas? I really, on this tour, I got to tell you, San Antonio, I think you'd have a field day over there.
Well, but here's the thing. The other part of liberalism is also true in Portland. So I never encounter the Antifa madness and the mayor and his confusion. It's like the mayor of your town. You never run into it. What I do run into is a clean, functional city. People, as far as I can tell, are very decent to each other. They make provisions for cyclists to commute around the place. So I think in some sense Portland it shows exactly the conflict between the left's better instincts and its worst instincts. And I hope that it will come around to the kind of enlightened progressivism that used to exist rather than the naive progressivism that seems to have taken over.